The footage began with static, then cleared into a nightmare. A squad of 12 Dravith shock troopers, each one nearly 8 feet tall and covered in bone-plated armor, advanced through a collapsed research facility on a planet the Galactic Archive still refused to name. Their helmet cameras shook with every step. Then something moved in the dark ahead of them, fast, low, and silent. 6 seconds later, all 12 were dead. No blaster fire, no plasma scorch marks. Just precise, brutal, close-quarters violence that ended before the Dravith could even scream a warning to each other. The final trooper's camera caught one clear frame before it hit the floor. A shape crouched over the last body, methodical, unhurried, wiping a blade clean on the dead soldier's armor. The image froze there. A single silhouette. No face, no insignia. Just calm, controlled stillness in the middle of a slaughter. Somewhere in the recording, before the feed cut to static, a Dravith commander could be heard screaming orders in a dialect the Academy's translation module struggled to keep up with. The words that did come through clearly were simple ones: fall back, regroup, retreat. Words that species had not needed to say in open combat for over 3 centuries. They never got the chance. The silhouette moved through the smoke like it had memorized the room before ever setting foot in it. The lights came up in Cadet Auditorium 7 at the Kalen Prime Military Command Academy, and nobody breathed. 3,000 cadets from over 40 species sat in stunned silence, staring at the frozen image still hanging on the massive holoscreen above the stage. Instructor Voss Karin, a veteran Threxian officer with silver scales and a reputation for never raising his voice, walked to the center of the stage with his hands clasped behind his back. "That footage is 11 years old," Voss said. "Recovered from a black site incursion that the Dravith Empire has spent over a decade trying to erase from every archive in known space. We recovered one copy, and it survived because a junior technician smuggled it out in a coolant canister rather than let it be destroyed." He let the silence stretch. "You are looking at the only confirmed visual record of an entity our intelligence division has designated Ghost Zero. In 11 years, this individual has been linked to the destruction of 4 fortified installations, the collapse of 2 supply chains that took decades to build, and the deaths of an estimated 300 elite soldiers across 6 different militaries. Not one of those militaries has ever recovered a body, a weapon signature, or a single piece of identifying information." A Vornathi cadet near the front raised a clawed hand. "Instructor, with respect, that footage shows one operator taking out 12 Dravith shock troopers in under 10 seconds. That is not possible for any known species. Even our own special forces would need heavy support to accomplish that." "Correct," Voss said. "Which is why Ghost Zero remains the single greatest unsolved mystery in modern galactic warfare. Every major intelligence agency in this room's home systems has a task force dedicated to identifying this individual, and every single one has failed." He gestured, and the screen shifted to a new angle of the same engagement, this one showing the shape moving between 2 collapsing support beams with an economy of motion that looked less like combat and more like a man walking through his own kitchen. "Species, homeworld, military affiliation, all unknown," Voss continued. "Some analysts believe this is a rogue splinter faction. Others believe it is a single individual operating alone for reasons we do not understand. What we do know is that whoever, or whatever that is, represents a threat tier beyond anything currently cataloged in Academy doctrine." In the back row, in the shadowed upper tier where the lighting rig cast everything into soft gray, a young human cadet sat quietly with his arms folded, watching the footage without expression. His name was Marcus Reyes, and if anyone had bothered to look at him instead of the screen, they might have noticed that his breathing had not changed once during the entire presentation. Not during the Dravith deaths, not during the silence, not even now. Nobody looked. Humans rarely got looked at in this auditorium. Kalen Prime accepted exactly 1 human cadet per admission cycle, a courtesy extended more out of diplomatic obligation than genuine respect. Humanity had joined the Galactic Concord only 19 years earlier, a fact that every other species in the room was keenly aware of, and most treated the human cadet program the way one might treat a rescue animal enrolled in an obedience class. Something to be tolerated. Occasionally photographed for goodwill press releases. Never taken seriously. Marcus had spent the last 2 years being underestimated with remarkable consistency, and he had never once corrected anyone. The Vornathi cadet who had spoken earlier, a broad-shouldered specimen named Draxus Kell with a family lineage of admirals stretching back 9 generations, turned in his seat and caught sight of the human in the back row. He smirked. "Hey Reyes," Draxus called out, loud enough for the rows around him to hear. "Bet your species is glad you weren't around 11 years ago. That footage would have given you nightmares. A ripple of laughter moved through the nearby seats. Marcus said nothing. He simply nodded once, politely, the way he nodded at most things, and returned his attention to the screen. Instructor Voss allowed the moment to pass without comment. He had learned over 3 decades of teaching that laughter in a room full of young soldiers was not worth interrupting unless it turned cruel. This was merely careless. Let us discuss tactical implications, Voss said, moving the lesson forward. If Ghost Zero represents an unknown threat capable of eliminating a 12-man shock trooper squad without detection, what does that suggest about the limitations of our current early warning doctrine? Hands rose across the auditorium. A Threxian cadet near the front suggested layered sensor grids with overlapping thermal signatures. Voss nodded, then asked what happened when an operator understood thermal blind spots well enough to route around 3 separate grids without triggering a single alert. Silence answered him. A Vornathi in the second tier proposed doubling patrol density. Voss asked what good doubled patrols did when the 12 dead troopers in the footage had been at triple standard density already, in a facility rated for a Tier 4 siege. Nobody answered that one either. The uncomfortable truth, Voss said, pacing the stage, is that Ghost Zero does not defeat our doctrine through superior firepower or superior numbers. Every engagement on record suggests a level of patience, discipline, and battlefield awareness that most of you will not develop in 20 years of active service, if you develop it at all. This is not a monster. This is a professional operating so far beyond the baseline that our instruments struggle to even model the behavior. The lesson continued for another 40 minutes, cadets debating sensor thresholds and perimeter theory, entirely unaware that the answer to their central mystery was sitting among them, listening with the mild, patient attention of someone auditing a class he had already passed a long time ago. It was near the end of the session that everything changed. A junior archivist, a nervous Threxian intern named Sela Vorn, hurried onto the stage and whispered urgently into Instructor Voss's ear. Voss's expression, normally carved from stone, shifted for the first time all day. He turned to the screen. It appears, Voss said slowly, that the archive's automated restoration process has completed on the recovered footage. There was additional data buried beneath corrosion damage on the original recording. A final camera angle we did not know existed. The room went quiet again, faster this time, the way a crowd goes quiet when it senses something is about to happen that it cannot look away from. Play it, Voss said. The screen flickered. The final seconds of the Dravith facility engagement loaded, this time from an angle mounted somewhere near the ceiling, looking almost directly down on the last standing trooper as he fell. The silhouette crouched over the body, exactly as before. But this camera caught something the others had not. As the figure straightened, rising from the crouch, something reflected the facility's dying emergency lighting for less than half a second. A face. Instructor Voss froze the frame instantly, then zoomed. The image sharpened, resolved, clarified. It was a human face. Young, calm, unmistakable. 3,000 cadets sat frozen, staring at a face that belonged to a species most of them had spent 2 years quietly mocking. A face with a small, faint scar above the left eyebrow. A face with dark eyes that showed absolutely no strain, no fear, no adrenaline, despite having just ended 12 lives in under 10 seconds. Draxus Kell, still smirking from his earlier joke, glanced up at the screen out of idle curiosity, and his smirk died on his face like a candle in a hurricane, because the face on the screen was looking directly into the camera with an expression of mild, professional boredom, and it was sitting 3 rows behind him, right now, in this auditorium. Slowly, one cadet at a time, heads began to turn, first a Vornathi in the 3rd row, then a cluster of Threxians near the aisle, then an entire section, then another, the movement spreading through the auditorium like a wave crossing dark water, thousands of eyes drifting away from the frozen image on the screen and settling instead on the quiet young man sitting alone in the back row with his arms still folded. Marcus Reyes looked back at all of them without blinking. Somewhere near the middle rows, a young Threxian cadet who had shared a study group with Marcus twice a week for the past semester made a small, strangled sound as though trying to reconcile the quiet classmate who borrowed her notes on orbital mechanics with the still frame currently frozen above the stage. A Vornathi officer cadet near the aisle actually reached for the sidearm holstered at his hip before catching himself, remembering, with visible embarrassment, that cadets were not issued live ammunition inside academy grounds. Marcus noticed the motion anyway. His eyes flicked toward the cadet for less than a second, registered the threat as nothing, and moved on. That single glance told anyone paying close enough attention everything they needed to know about what kind of soldier they were looking at. Instructor Voss turned from the screen to the audience and followed their collective gaze, and when his eyes finally landed on the human cadet in the upper tier, the color drained visibly from his scaled face. "Cadet Reyes," Voss said, his voice unsteady for the first time in 30 years of teaching. "Please explain to me why the individual in this classified combat footage from 11 years ago appears to be you." The entire auditorium held its breath. Marcus uncrossed his arms, sat forward slightly, and considered the question with the calm patience of a man being asked something mildly inconvenient rather than catastrophic. "Instructor," Marcus said, his voice carrying easily in the dead silence. "With respect, I think you're about to have a very bad week." Draxus Kell found his voice first, though it came out considerably higher than he intended. "That's impossible. You'd have been a child 11 years ago. There's no way you could have—" "I was 14, Marcus said simply. The words landed like a physical blow. Somewhere in the upper tier, a Threxian cadet actually dropped her datapad. Instructor Voss took an involuntary step backward from the podium. 14 years old and you eliminated an entire Dravith shock trooper squad. With respect, instructor, that wasn't the hard part of that week," Marcus said, and for just a moment something shifted behind his calm eyes, something old and tired and far too heavy for a young face. "The hard part came after." The doors at the rear of the auditorium slammed open. 4 armored figures strode in, moving with the unmistakable bearing of Concord Central Command enforcement, their weapons not drawn but their hands resting meaningfully near them. At their head walked a tall woman in a black and silver uniform Marcus recognized immediately, though nobody else in the room did. Director Ilana Voss, no relation to the instructor, head of Galactic Concord Deep Intelligence, did not so much as glance at the frozen image still hanging on the screen. Her eyes went straight to the back row, straight to Marcus, and her expression was not surprise, it was relief, buried under exhaustion, buried under something that looked dangerously close to fear. "Cadet Reyes," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times and still wasn't ready for it. "Your classification just expired. Command needs you off this campus in the next 10 minutes, and I need you to understand that what happens next is going to make that footage look like a training exercise." Marcus rose from his seat, unhurried, and every cadet in that auditorium instinctively leaned away from him as he moved, as if their bodies understood something their minds were still refusing to process. He walked down the tiered steps with the same unremarkable posture he had carried for 2 full years, the posture of a student nobody bothered to track, and it was only now, watching him descend past row after row of frozen alien faces, that anyone seemed to notice how quietly he placed each footstep, how his eyes swept the exits and the armed escort without ever appearing to look at either. Instructor Voss found his voice again, though it cracked slightly on the first word. "Director, this cadet is enrolled under standard Concord academic protections. I cannot simply release him into military custody without—" "Instructor," Ilana said, not unkindly, "I would very much like to explain the last 19 years of classified history to you right now. I do not have time." "Neither does he." "Director," Marcus said, "does this mean they found the second facility?" Every trace of composure vanished from Ilana Voss's face. "How do you know about the second facility?" Marcus allowed himself the smallest, saddest smile the auditorium had ever seen on a human face. "Because I built it," he said, "and it should have stayed buried for another 50 years. Behind him, the frozen image of his own younger face still hung on the massive screen, watching over an auditorium full of cadets who, until 11 minutes ago, had believed they understood exactly where humanity belonged in the galaxy's pecking order. Nobody in that room believed it anymore. As Marcus reached the doors and the armored escort closed in around him, Director Voss turned back one last time toward the stunned crowd, and the look on her face made it clear that whatever was coming next would make Ghost Zero's classified file look like the opening chapter of a much longer, much darker book. The transport ship broke atmosphere in under 4 minutes, which was 3 minutes faster than Academy regulations allowed for any vessel departing Kalen Prime airspace. Nobody stopped it. Nobody even radioed a warning. Director Ilana Voss sat across from Marcus in the stripped-down passenger bay, her fingers laced together so tightly the knuckles had gone pale, and for a long while neither of them spoke. It was Marcus who finally broke the silence. "How many did they lose finding it?" he asked quietly. 11, Ilana said. "A recon team out of the perimeter fleet stumbled onto an energy signature nobody could explain. They sent a survey drone in before anyone realized what they were looking at. The facility woke up when the drone crossed the outer perimeter. It shouldn't have woken up for anything smaller than a full assault force. That's the problem, Marcus. It didn't just wake up. it responded. Automated defense systems engaged a drone with lethal weapons designed to stop armored incursions. Whatever you built out there, it's still active. It's still thinking it's under attack. And now half the Concord's intelligence community knows there's a second black site connected to Ghost Zero, and they don't know what's inside it, and they don't know why a 14-year-old human built it. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking out the viewport at the curve of the planet falling away beneath them. "I wasn't 14 when I built it," he said. "I was 14 during the Dravith raid. The facility came 2 years after that. I was 16. Alana closed her eyes. "There's more, isn't there?" "There's always more," Marcus said. "You know that better than anyone. You're the one who recruited me." The memory surfaced whether Marcus wanted it or not, the way old memories always did when someone finally said the truth out loud after years of silence. He had been 11 years old when the first Dravith scouting vessels entered the outer edge of the Sol system, testing humanity's defenses the way a predator tests a new species before deciding whether it's prey or competition. Earth's fledgling defense fleet, barely 3 years old, barely tested, had been annihilated in under 6 hours. What the Dravith hadn't counted on was what happened after. Humanity did not send another fleet. Humanity sent people, small teams, deniable teams, teams built from soldiers who volunteered for programs that did not exist on paper, programs that took the sharpest minds and the steadiest hands from a species desperate enough to try anything and trained them in ways that no other Concord military would have considered ethical, or possible, or survivable. Marcus had been the youngest recruit in the program's history. Not because anyone wanted a child soldier, but because the testing had revealed something in him that the instructors had never seen before and never fully explained to him even now. An almost total absence of fear response under extreme stress. A processing speed in combat scenarios that outpaced adult candidates twice his age. A capacity to compartmentalize violence and consequence that should have terrified everyone who studied it, and did. By 14, he had already survived 2 years of training that broke grown soldiers in months. The Dravith facility raid had been his first live deployment, not because Command believed a 14-year-old was ready, but because the facility held intelligence that could save entire colony worlds, and Marcus was the only asset who could reach it in time. He remembered the briefing room more clearly than he remembered most of his childhood. A single instructor, a grim-faced woman named Colonel Aisha Barnett, who would later become the closest thing to family Marcus had left, had laid a single photograph on the table in front of him. 12 Dravith shock troopers guarding a facility that intelligence believed contained the coordinates to Earth's remaining colony worlds, the ones the Dravith hadn't found yet, the ones that represented humanity's only chance of surviving as a species if the homeworld fell. "You don't have to do this," she had told him. "Nobody would blame you for saying no." "If I say no," Marcus had answered, "how many colonies does the Dravith find first?" She hadn't answered. She hadn't needed to. He had never told anyone what he saw in those tunnels. He had never told anyone what he did to get out. What he remembered most, even now years later, was not the combat itself. Combat had been simple, almost mechanical, a sequence of decisions his training had already made for him before his conscious mind caught up. What he remembered was the silence afterward, standing alone in a facility full of the dead, understanding for the first time that he had just become something his own species would never fully understand, and that there was no version of his life that would ever let him go back to being simply a child again. "The second facility," Marcus said slowly, "was built after the raid. Command needed a place to process what we learned from the Dravith intelligence, a place to prepare in case Earth ever needed real defenses instead of borrowed time. I designed the automated systems myself, because I didn't trust anyone else to keep them contained. I built failsafes that should have kept it dormant for 50 years, until humanity was strong enough to actually need what's stored inside it." "And what exactly is stored inside it?" Marcus looked at her, and for the first time since the auditorium, something like genuine worry crossed his calm features. "Everything we learned about how to beat a species that outnumbers us 1,000 to 1, he said. "Every weakness, every doctrine flaw, every piece of intelligence that turned 11 years of quiet defensive war into humanity actually having a chance. If that facility is compromised, every advantage we've spent a decade building goes public. Every government that's underestimated us finds out exactly how much we've been hiding, and exactly how prepared we are to stop underestimating ourselves." The transport shuddered as it dropped into faster-than-light transit, and for a moment the viewport dissolved into streaking light. "There's something else you should know," Alana said. "The reason the footage got restored today, the reason that final camera angle suddenly appeared after 11 years of corruption, is not an accident. Someone deliberately unlocked that data. Someone wanted the galaxy to see your face. Marcus went very still. Who? We don't know yet, but whoever it is, they didn't just want to expose Ghost Zero. They wanted to expose you specifically, in front of 3,000 cadets from 40 different species, at the exact moment intelligence confirms the second facility has been triggered. That's not coincidence. That's a coordinated operation, and it means someone out there has been planning this for a very long time. Marcus leaned back in his seat, and for the first time, something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Then it's a good thing, he said, that I've had a very long time to prepare for exactly this. The transport arrived at Perimeter Station 7 6 hours later, a sprawling defensive installation orbiting the edge of Concord space, and the moment Marcus stepped off the ship, the atmosphere on the station changed. Soldiers who had spent years hearing rumors about Ghost Zero without ever confirming they existed suddenly found themselves standing 3 meters from a young man barely into his 20s, and none of them knew whether to salute him or run from him. Command Admiral Petra Solane, a severe woman with silver hair cropped close to her skull and a service record longer than most careers, met them at the docking bay with an expression that suggested she had aged a decade in the last 6 hours. The second facility went fully active 40 minutes ago, she said without preamble. It's not just defending itself anymore, it's transmitting. Something inside triggered a broadcast protocol, and we can't identify the recipient. Show me, Marcus said. The command center was chaos disguised as order. Dozens of officers moving between stations with the controlled urgency of people trying not to look as frightened as they felt. A massive display dominated the far wall, showing a schematic of the facility Marcus had built 6 years earlier, half of it lit up in warning amber, the other half a solid, ominous red. A young lieutenant nearly collided with Marcus as he crossed the floor, caught herself and stared at him with the same wide-eyed disbelief he had grown used to seeing on every face since the auditorium. Marcus offered her a small, reassuring nod, the kind of gesture a stranger gives another stranger on a bad day, and kept walking. It seemed to steady her more than any order could have. The broadcast is encrypted with a cipher our systems have never seen, an analyst reported, not looking up from her console. Whatever it's transmitting, it's not meant for us. How long until it reaches Dravith space? Marcus asked. At current transmission speed, 5 hours and 12 minutes. Maybe less if they're using a relay station we don't know about. They're using a relay, Marcus said flatly. There's an abandoned Concord listening post 2 systems over that was decommissioned 5 years ago. I flagged it as a vulnerability when I built the facility. Command never authorized the resources to dismantle it. Admiral Solane's expression darkened. You're telling me someone has been sitting on a vulnerability you personally identified for 5 years, waiting for exactly this moment. I'm telling you this was never a spontaneous act of sabotage, Marcus said. This took years of patience. Someone studied my work closely enough to know its weaknesses better than the people who were supposed to be guarding it. Marcus studied the schematic in silence, his eyes tracking through systems he had designed himself, systems that should have been sleeping peacefully for another 4 decades. It's meant for the Dravith, he said finally. The room went silent. The intelligence stored in that facility isn't just about how to defend against them, Marcus continued. It includes detailed records of Dravith command structure, supply routes, internal political fractures, everything we gathered during the raid and every raid after it. If someone triggered that facility deliberately and is broadcasting its contents to the Dravith Empire, they're not trying to expose humanity's secrets to the galaxy at large. They're trying to hand the Draveth a roadmap to destroy us. Alana finished quietly. Worse, Marcus said, they're trying to make it look like we did it ourselves. Like Ghost Zero went rogue and decided to sell out humanity's defenses. By the time anyone figures out this was sabotage, the damage will already be done, and every species in the Concord will have watched a human soldier's face broadcast across the galaxy right before humanity's darkest secrets went public. Nobody will believe it was a setup. They'll believe exactly what they saw in that auditorium. A monster, unmasked. Admiral Solane's jaw tightened. Can you stop the transmission? I built the system, Marcus said, already moving toward the tactical display, already calculating routes and timelines with the same calm, terrible focus that had once cleared a Dravith facility of 12 elite soldiers in under 10 seconds. I can stop anything I built, but I need a ship. I need 6 hours, and I need everyone in this room to understand that whoever orchestrated this has been inside Concord intelligence long enough to access footage that's been sealed for 11 years. That means they're still here. That means this isn't over when I shut down that facility. Alana stepped forward, and for the first time since the auditorium, there was something steady and resolved in her voice instead of exhaustion. Then we don't just shut it down, she said. We find out who did this, and we make sure the entire galaxy understands exactly what humanity is capable of when someone tries to destroy us from the inside. Marcus looked at the schematic one more time, at the amber warnings creeping steadily toward full red, and allowed himself the smallest exhale, the closest thing to relief his training had ever permitted him. "Get me that ship," he said. "It's time the galaxy learned why they were right to be afraid, just not for the reasons they think." Admiral Solane hesitated, studying him with the look of someone recalculating everything she thought she understood about the young man standing in front of her. 6 years ago you were 16 years old, designing defense systems capable of outsmarting an empire that has existed for 3 centuries. What exactly are you now, Cadet Reyes? Marcus considered the question the way he considered most things, carefully, without hurry, weighing the honest answer against the comfortable one. "I'm what happens," he said finally, "when a species runs out of time to be underestimated and decides to stop waiting for permission to be taken seriously. There are more of us. Not many, not yet, but we exist, and we've been quietly making sure humanity has options nobody in this galaxy knew we needed." Behind him the display flickered, and a new warning appeared across the schematic in sharp red letters. "Transmission complete." Somewhere out among the stars, the message was already gone, already traveling toward Dravith space at speeds no ship in the room could catch, carrying with it every secret humanity had spent a decade protecting. Marcus stared at those words for a long, silent moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the calm that had defined him for 2 years at Kalen Prime. "Then we're not chasing a transmission anymore," he said. "We're going to war." Ilana moved to his side, watching the same red letters he was watching, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. "Marcus," she said quietly, "whoever did this wanted the galaxy to see you as a monster before they let this secret out. They wanted your face to be the last thing every species remembers before they learn what humanity has been hiding. That means they're not just trying to start a war, they're trying to make sure humanity fights it alone." Marcus turned toward the command center's main doors, already calculating the coordinates of the abandoned relay station, already 3 steps ahead of a plan he hadn't finished forming. "Then we'll just have to give them a reason to remember that face for something else," he said. "Get Command Admiral Barnett on a secure channel. Tell her Ghost Zero is finally coming out of the dark, and this time the whole galaxy is going to be watching." The doors slid open ahead of him, and Marcus Reyes walked out into whatever came next with the same unhurried, unshakable calm that had once convinced 3,000 cadets they were looking at the most dangerous soldier in known space. They had no idea how right they were.